His secondary hearts were misfiring, an erratic, stuttering rhythm against his ribs. That was the first sign of cascading organ failure. Krell dragged his heavy boots across the iron-dusted regolith, his vision tunneling into a narrow gray smear. Ahead of him, the human instructor wasn't running. He was just walking with a steady, metronomic rhythm that defied the crushing gravity of the moon. Krell's species was built to strike fast, rip the throat, and vanish. But right now, his body was consuming its own muscle tissue just to stay upright. The human was training them to become the monster that never stops walking. It turned out the galaxy's elite didn't shatter under plasma fire. They dissolved under time. Krell had arrived at the Iron Lung outpost on the moons of Kyber 4 barely 3 cycles ago. He was a top-tier graduate. His chitin polished to a high sheen, mandibles clicking with the restless energy of youth. He had slotted into a multi-species formation of 20 different galactic races. These were war vets from the Rim blockades, apex killers. They had claws, neurotoxins, and optical camouflage. But none of that mattered to Commander Thorn. The human instructor had begun the mandatory endurance certification by pacing the line. He didn't bark orders. He didn't insult their planetary origins. The quiet was entirely unnatural. It was a terrifying, predatory stillness that made the non-human recruits twitch. Thorn's boots crunched softly against the gravel. The rhythm felt like a countdown. Then, without warning, Thorn halted inches from Krell's face. The human radiated heat, smelling of copper and synthetic rations. Identify the tactical moment when retreat is the only logical option. The scream tore from Thorn's throat, raw and sudden, rattling Krell's sensitive auditory canals. A biological fear response, a deeply ingrained prey panic unique to human proximity, seized Krell's throat. His ancestral instincts screamed at him to calculate the survival variables. It was the galaxy's most dangerous math, the 15% rule. For millions of years, his people knew that if a hunt drained more than 15% of their energy reserves, they had to abort. You strike, you fade, you survive. It was the absolute law of the cosmos. But looking into the flat, forward-facing eyes of Commander Thorn, Krell realized something horrifying. Evolution forgot to give humans a quit button. Their logic was biologically broken. Never, Krell stammered. The conditioned response tasted like ash in his mouth. Thorn stared right through him, his expression entirely unreadable. Correct, fall in. There were no weapons issued, no armor, just a grueling, low-intensity march across the jagged craters. The pace wasn't fast enough to tear ligaments or snap bone. It was much worse. It was a slow, agonizing drain designed to bypass physical strength and target psychological exhaustion. By the 4th hour, the reptilian recruits from the core worlds were dragging their tails, gasping for the thin, recycled air leaking from their collars. The insectoid vets were shedding weight, their exoskeletons rattling with every step. But Thorn just kept walking at the front of the column. He never looked back. He didn't need to. Krell's calves burned, a deep, cellular fire that demanded he lie down in the dirt and sleep. The urge to flee, to reset his hunting clock and hide, was overwhelming. Every instinct demanded he break the line and preserve his life. But the steady, relentless thud of Thorn's boots pulled him forward against his own biology. High above the marching column, behind the thick glass of the observation deck, Director Vance watched the biometrics of the recruits flash red across the terminal monitors. The real test hadn't even begun. Vance stood by the tempered glass of the observation deck. The biometric streams cascading across the monitors bathed his scaled face in a steady, warning amber. The door slid open behind him. Thorn stepped into the room, his uniform dark with sweat, but his breathing was entirely even. "Look at them," Vance murmured. by tapping a heavy claw against the display screen. Every single one of them hitting the threshold. The screens detailed the alien physiology below. Krell's species, the heavy-world reptilians, the multi-limbed insectoids, all of them hardwired to the exact same ancient law. They were strike-and-fade ambushers. The data spiked sharply, flashing red across the board, right at the 15% energy loss mark. It was their biological fail-safe. To push beyond it meant risking systemic shutdown. It meant failure. Thorn crossed his arms, staring down at the dust clouds. They want to stop. Their bodies are screaming at them to hide. Vance turned his gaze from the monitors to the human. Truth is, standing this close to Thorn was always mildly unsettling. And yours does not. Your ancestors didn't outrun their prey. They outwalked it. It was the core difference, the terrifying truth of the human niche. Humans didn't rely on speed, venom, or camouflage. They were persistence predators. They tracked an animal across burning plains for days, never letting it rest, never letting it cool down until the prey simply collapsed from thermal exhaustion. Until its heart stopped. The human brain was uniquely disconnected from the biological logic of surrender. The manual dictates a mandatory rest cycle at this juncture, Thorn said, his voice flat, devoid of sympathy. Discard the manual, Vance replied. He turned back to the window, watching the broken, ragged formation dragging their limbs below. Push them past the threshold, drive them until they reach a state of total metabolic collapse. If they want to survive the wars to come, they have to break their own biology, teach them how to hunt like you. It became a relentless, waking blur. For 3 months, the jagged craters of Kyber 4 offered no sanctuary. Thorn never let them fully rest. He never let them reset their hunting clocks. The moment Krell's muscles began to cool, the moment his secondary hearts slowed to a safe baseline rhythm, the human was there, standing over them, walking, always walking. Krell tasted copper and ammonia in the back of his throat. His joints ground together without fluid. He felt his body cannibalize its own tissue just to fuel the next step. This was the psychology of total war, ground down to the friction of a boot heel on rock. It was a brutal cage match between mental fortitude and biological determinism. Krell shed his polished exterior. His mandibles dulled from grinding them together in agony. The instinct to flee, the deep-seated panic of the 15% threshold, was slowly pulverized into dust under Thorn's boots. When Krell's body demanded he collapse, he learned to force his mind to pull the levers. He took the next step, and then the next. 3 months later, the wind howled across the launch pad as the transport ship's thrusters whined, kicking up heavy clouds of iron dust. Krell stood on the loading ramp, ignoring the stinging debris against his scarred carapace. The surviving recruits stood beside him, a silent row of broken biology and rebuilt minds. He didn't look like an elite graduate anymore. He didn't look like a soldier from the Rim blockades. He looked entirely hollowed out, stripped of everything but forward momentum. His posture had permanently shifted. The twitchy, restless energy of an ambusher, the constant need to scan for an exit, was completely gone. In its place was a heavy, unnatural stillness. He watched the horizon with flat, unblinking eyes. He felt the slow, rhythmic thud of his own heart against his ribs. For the first time in his life, it didn't sound like a frantic countdown telling him to run away. It sounded like a steady, relentless drumbeat. He was no longer a creature of the quick strike. He had become something much worse. Krell had learned how to haunt his enemies until they died of fatigue.